All right, joining me now is Neil Dalal, who is covering the Washington Wizards for Hoop District and also does some special work for Sports Rabbi, covering Denny Avdia specifically. Neil, thank you so much for taking the time with me, man. Really excited to see your Wizards coverage this year.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Course. And let's get right into it. Obviously, Washington made some big moves this offseason, trading Bradley Beal, trading Kristaps Porzingis. It feels like going a little bit of a different direction this year. What can you tell us about what's interesting about the team right now? What are you most looking forward to covering about this team this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, there's been a lot of turnover for the organization, in the past 5, 6 months. The owner, Ted Leonsis, made the decision to move on from, then front office president Tommy Shepard, kind of citing that, back-to-back years of not making the playoffs, which are always important to him. He didn't see, much of a vision. And, I think it was really, a strong offseason for Washington to get a guy like Michael Winger and have him then grab a guy like Will Dawkins from Oklahoma City, Travis Schlenk, who was, the president of basketball operations in Atlanta, who, drafted and created that Trey Young era team with the Hawks. And so, yeah, they quickly made the decision that, hey, we are not going to be a sustainable winner around a team built around, Bradley Beal, Kristaps Porzingis, and Kyle Kuzma. They quickly came to that realization. I think the fan base, came to that realization maybe a couple years ago. But Beal was always someone coveted by the owner, Ted Leonsis, and wanted to keep him around. But now it's, a blank canvas, as Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma are always saying and repeating. Obviously, Poole was the byproduct of, then flipping Chris Paul, who was, the main get in the Bradley Beal to Phoenix trade. I think Winger, Dawkins, and company did a great job then flipping Chris Paul, to Golden State for Jordan Poole, who, people might think he had a down year. I think anybody who had, the weeks before the season started that he did last year would have had a down year after that awkwardness. But he's coming in and he's hungry and he's going to be able to, get the reins and, really flap his wings a bit. I think for me, that's definitely going to be the number one thing that's, going to be exciting. But there are storylines really all over the place, even though, it's a team that's not really going to be contending for much this season. It's all going to be about development.
Yeah, development is the direction that they've finally chosen and has felt for a while like the Wizards in the previous regime were more of a let's see what happens kind of team, definitely waiting and sitting on their hands a little bit. Now you've picked a direction if you're the Wizards and you are going with this direction with Jordan Poole kind of as your first option scorer, maybe your second option if you're high on Kyle Kuzma. What do you think that's going to look like for the offense this year for Washington? And is that something that it's more of a fun factor kind of decision, or more, hey, let's see what Jordan actually can provide on that end?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, really let him see how great he can be. He's 24 years old. Will Dawkins, the GM, describes him as a pre-prime player, still growing into his own. He's going to have the ball in his hands way more than, he did obviously playing in Golden State, where you have, arguably, multiple Hall of Famers over there that he's trying to share the ball with. I think what's going to be interesting that Kyle Kuzma noted was, both Kuzma and Poole, have played with Hall of Fame players and had to be, third or fourth options on a team. So they learned how to play off ball. And so maybe now that complements each other, even though the ball is going to be in their hands a lot of times, when it's not, they can still be effective and still contribute to what the Wizards are trying to do. I think offensively, Jordan Poole is, saying that, hey, I'm not going to be, shot hunting every night, trying to get his or anything like that. I know Stephen A. Smith, put out about James Harden that, oh, he wanted to go to Houston and get a scoring title. And Jordan Poole is not anything like that. He's saying that, hey, I've always prided myself on being, not a me player. He wants to still do what's in the best interest of the team, even if he doesn't get an assist because he got the hockey assist, on a particular play. He's always trying to make that pass. If he draws two, he's fine with giving up, the ball to somebody who has to be open elsewhere on the court. So, obviously it's early. It's media day, and media day is an optimistic time for, a lot of teams around the NBA, but they're all saying the right things. They all have the right attitude. They all seemingly have the right character and, just desire to compete. day in and day out. And, we'll see. Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma are obviously going to now be getting, number one and number two defenders going at them every night, seeing double teams that they might not be, as accustomed to be seeing. And that's where, you might see some struggles. But, Jordan Poole, I would got to say, haven't watched too much of him being in the Western Conference for the first part of his career, but exciting player, can light it up, has a lot of talent, and, really is going to be able to make of it what he can this season.
Should be a fascinating rotation as well. Right now, I'm looking at a starting lineup that's kind of projected as Tyus Jones, Jordan Poole, Denny Avdia, Kyle Kuzma, and Daniel Gafford. Does that sound about right to you, or am I missing somebody in that lineup?
No, I think certainly, if I were to guess right now, Wes Unseld Jr. is always someone to, keep it kind of close to the vest until he has to show his cards, come October 25th when they travel and open up the season in Indiana. But I would say, that's about right. We'll see if Daniel Gafford is fully healthy. He had a hard spill in a pickup game, I believe, a week ago today. We're recording this on Friday. It was last Friday of September. And so they're being very cautious and just saying, hey, 2 to 4 weeks and, we're going to reevaluate. So, there's a slight possibility that, you could see Danilo Gallinari, making his return from, a pretty grueling ACL rehab, as a starting five for the Wizards if Gafford is not quite healthy
Ooh.
or, not quite up to conditioning standards. The three spot is probably the other, a little bit of a question mark. I think, it makes sense to have Denny Avdia as your starter there to kind of complement, maybe a little bit of the defensive deficiencies you might have, with a smaller front or smaller backcourt that is of Tyus Jones and Jordan Poole. Denny Avdia is a very strong defender, does not necessarily need the ball in his hands a ton as a starter. So I think that makes the most sense over a guy like, say, Corey Kispert, who also is, not necessarily the greatest defender in the world. And so, but I think, the five, if Daniel Gafford is healthy, that's pretty much what they're going to try and see and get out of him. And then the three is, I would agree, Denny Avdia is probably the front runner there, but, you might see, Corey Kispert potentially try and, snag that role as well.
Tell me a little bit about Johnny Davis, Bilal Coulibaly, both of those guys, young players. Now, if you're a team like Washington that is looking to develop a little bit and looking for long-term building blocks per se, it seems like it would be in the right course of action to let those guys play and see where they're at. But in previous regimes and even under Wes Unseld, Johnny Davis took a lot of time to kind of get into that lineup last year. What can you tell us about the direction with those two young guys specifically?
Yeah, so obviously, Johnny Davis was the 10th overall pick last year, comes in and was not drafted by this front office, quite frankly. And,
Mm.
to some players that might be, a little bit demoralizing. But I think the one nice thing that Michael Winger and Will Dawkins have come in and done and made clear is, hey, everything that happened in the past, whatever. It's a clean slate. We're ripping off the rearview mirror. We're going to worry about what's going forward now. And I think that's very fair because, as Winger said, they had different intentions and different goals last year. They were trying to make the playoffs last year. They were trying to get, a little bit of, first round playoff revenue by having, two home games at Capital One Arena. I think Johnny Davis, particularly, the things that people might not understand is that, it took him some time to go from the year one to year two player he was just at Wisconsin. At year two, after of which then he obviously, became a lottery pick in the NBA, he took a massive jump. Year one, I don't think anybody had him on a radar as let
Right.
alone a lottery pick, but even a first rounder, people wouldn't have even thought he would have declared for the draft after just his sophomore year. I think he can make that same jump again this year. Obviously, it's a very crowded guard lineup and rotation in Washington right now, and we might see things, open up more for him, post trade deadline if a couple guys are moved. But also, people don't realize that Johnny Davis is a young guy. He had his first kid this time last year during training camp. I cannot
Mm.
imagine being a 20-year-old or however old he was having a screaming, crying baby at home trying to get ready to play an NBA season. So, there's
Man.
a very much a human element to this. And, he took his time. I think by the end of the year, you saw him get a little bit more confidence. He now, spent a lot of time in DC this past offseason. So the playing time might be, up and down, and he might have to play again, some minutes with the Capital City Go-Go, but I think you're going to see a much more confident Johnny Davis. And maybe, he strikes enough of a, glow for the new front office where they're like, okay, we're going to pick up his third-year option. We're going to, keep him in, the rotation and whatnot. So hopefully, Johnny's a very nice guy, kind of keeps to himself, but, he should be able to be, a good rotation player for Washington for years to come. As for Bilal, you know, he's been, a pleasure to, discuss with and talk with, in just a few times that we've interacted post draft. Obviously, the Wizards kind of, took some people by surprise by not moving up to seventh instead of, their spot at eighth. They were kind of, getting worried that, Oklahoma City might have tried to jump from 10 to 7 to get in front of them. Obviously, Will Dawkins
Right.
is familiar, with his old colleagues there. But this is a guy, 19 years old, third youngest player in the NBA. The Wizards are raving about him, and I can see why. He has such a great demeanor for a 19-year-old. I wish I was that mature when I was 19, but he's all about the right things. He's hungry. He has a great attitude. They know that, okay, his prime is not going to be for 5, 6, 7 years down the road, but he already can come in and be a potential, strong defender in today's NBA. All of the offensive stuff, might, take some time, but even small things like Jordan Poole going in the locker room and moving his locker next to his own, those are things that people might not realize, but that's a huge thing for a young kid's confidence. And just being able to have someone like Jordan Poole in his ear, giving him the ins and outs. Denny Avdia said the same thing. He said, "Hey, I was in this spot same as him 3 years ago, being a young kid coming to a new country, trying to make a name for himself in the NBA." So we might, it'll be to be determined again. It's a very packed guard and wing room rotation wise for the Wizards, who are trying to be competitive because that's the good habits they want to build. So we'll see how much playing time Bilal gets the first half of the season. Again, like Johnny, some of it might be coming, with the Capital City Go-Go, but it will be very much a, development, get him used to NBA lifestyle kind of start for Bilal, who, again, is very charming, very charismatic guy, always has a smile on his face. So you
Sure.
can see why the Wizards, made that pick at 7 and said, we don't care what any mock draft thinks, we're going to go get our guy.
Love that. Also, very interesting to think of Jordan Poole, the steady veteran in the ear of Bilal Coulibaly. That's very interesting. Okay, well, so there's clearly talent here. There's clearly talent and rotation caliber talent for this team. I'm not sure what the direction looks like still. I think that it's going to be definitely a work in progress throughout the season, trying to see what happens. I don't have this team winning a lot of games. I think I have them at about 24 wins, but where do you see them this year, and what do you think is the goal for this season right at this point?
Yeah, I think, Vegas also set, the over-under line for them at 24 and a half this year. I believe somebody told me that that is literally the lowest line of all 30 NBA teams that Vegas
Yeah.
has set this year. I think they're gonna definitely clear that because this is
Mm.
not a tank rebuild. They're not going to be purposely losing, trying to get a better, lottery pick or whatever it might be. They're trying to, form good habits. They're gonna they as much of the rotation players that we've talked about a little bit. They have several veterans on this team who are going to play competitive basketball and not going to have to necessarily go through growing pains of adjusting and making mistakes and things like that. So, Michael Winger said it. There are going to be games this year where you don't expect them to be in it or, potentially win, but I think that's where they're going to catch teams by surprise. Opposing teams might come in and think, oh, it's the Wizards, they're not contending for anything this year. It's going to be an easy night. That was a bunch of games that the, John Wall era Wizards would lose to sub 500 teams. I think now the roles are kind of reversed where the Wizards are going to kind of be playing the role of spoilers at times for other teams. 24, wins, like, to me, that's a bit too low. It's less than a third of the games, it's only 30% of games. I can see them winning, 30 games because they're going to try and, be, that workmanship mentality day in and day out, always trying to get better, always trying to improve. Obviously, knock on wood, as with any team, you got to hope that injuries, stay away. But I don't see why this team couldn't win, 30 games. Obviously, they're not really trying to compete for the play-in and maybe squeak into the playoffs or anything like that. They're trying to let things happen naturally.
Right.
But I still think that, you're going to catch teams on bad nights, either, second night of back-to-back or, they just are overlooking you a little bit. And that's going to be, 6 to maybe 12, games right there that you might not pencil in as wins at the beginning of the season, but, could flip in the Wizards' direction.
Well, we will see what happens, Neil. He is covering the Washington Wizards for Hoop District. Neil, thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for your work this season, and good luck.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Ryan.